All right, guys, welcome to week 4, chapter 4. Some of you have asked for pictures of the baby, so I am very proud to do that. Yesterday was Grandparents' Day, and we went and visited our little grandbaby and his parents, and it was awesome. So this is Caden. As of yesterday, he was 2 weeks old, so we are doing well. This is my dad holding him. My dad's 90 years old. It was a really sweet pic. And this is my precious wife and myself holding the baby. So anyway, thank y'all for being excited with me and for me. It's really kind of a cool thing. Enjoying being a grandparent. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so we are going to talk about I kept trying to figure out what the ancient roots thing was really all about, and I think remember that Bowen was pretty big on evolution, pretty evolutionistic, and yet still some incredible insights. So I think Bowen would say that there is this process that is, he wouldn't use the word mystically, but like we don't understand it, we can't explain it, but this process of how we are influenced for maybe since the beginning of time, and again the whole evolutionistic thinking in terms of evolving, adapting, those kinds of things. So let's just tuck that away to the side for a minute, and I'm just going to dive in and talk about the things in the chapter. So one of the things that I really think is important for us to think about and understand is the incredible complexity of how we are how we impact one another, and how that is very much a reciprocal process. So every action that I take, everything that I do affects my family, and I am affected by my family in every action that I do. And it's just this kind of back and forth process that really goes on and on and on. And I think I just talked about something from another slide, but kind of getting ahead of myself, so forgive me. So back to Bowen. We talked about triangulation a lot. We've talked about this concept, but also know that is how he views the fundamental unit of the family as that triangle. And it can be any three people in a family. You could have a family of, somebody's got 10 kids, right? So there's going to be multiple triangles within that system. That doesn't mean that we can't all sit down in a room together. You big family, sit around the table, 15 people, whatever, and there's interaction. Sure. That doesn't take away from that at all. But there is this significant aspect of how triangles impact the operation of the family, and again, each individual within the triangle affects the others, and vice versa, and back and forth. So you think about in this fourth bullet, you think about the child who is rebellious and says, well, I'm not going to hold mom and dad's values. I'm not going to do that. Okay, but literally that decision it comes from and is based on the family, and it's a reaction to the family. Or the flip side could be a child that's not rebellious, that says, yeah, I believe the things that mom and dad believe, and I'm going to align myself up with them the best I can. And that comes from the family. So even when the kid is trying to step outside of by rebellion, they're still very much impacted by uh, the family's belief systems and the interactions that they have with their family. So whether it is in line with or against or neutral, every decision that we make, everything that we do, we impact one another. And the awareness part, I mean, we can obviously increase in our level of awareness. We talk a lot as counselors about being self-aware. um, we can be 50 years old and doing things, making decisions that are literally an attempt to slap mom and dad in the face, and maybe mom and dad are dead and long gone, right? So the impact is incredibly far-reaching, um, and can be completely subconscious, but nonetheless, uh, it's still there. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's conscious or subconscious; it's still there. So this process of differentiation obviously looks very different for every family and changes within that family from season to season and moment to moment and day to day sometimes, right? Um, the connectedness that we have, the intensity, it changes again with each individual in the family and is very different for different families and different family members. It's interesting how when we talk about this concept of how can two kids be raised in the same family and one is a drug addict and the other is a pastor. Um, One is extremely unhealthy, one is extremely healthy. One of the answers to that, and that's an extremely complex question, and there's a whole lot to that, but one of the answers to that is that how our perception of how differently we see things based on our personality, based on our mood at the moment, based on how we're doing, whether we're doing well or not doing so well. When a parent does something that's hurtful, that can be anywhere from a minor irritation to an absolute destructive process in a family member. And so, yeah, same family, same, but not really, right? So the way I was treated by my parents and the way my brother was treated by my parents are similar, yes, but very different based on our individual personalities and how we perceived them. Y'all know what it's like too when you talk about perception. Have you ever been in an argument with someone and you're going over what happened and what was said, and their perception of what happened and your perception of what happened are so different that you're thinking, am I losing my mind? Are they losing their mind? Were you even in the same room? Wow. I mean, it's amazing how radically different our perception of an event can be, and so therefore impacts us differently. Um, when we talk about genetics, let's say that a person has the genetic code or the genetic predisposition to be um, tall. Let's say they're going to be 6'5" based on their genetics, right? Well, what impacts that? Let's say that there's an incredible amount of negative emotional intensity, and because of that, there's a whole lot of harmful chemistry going through the body because of fear and anxiety and depression, and that actually has the ability to change, inhibit the genetic code from being completely fulfilled. Another example that might make more sense to you or be easier to wrap your brain around or understand or agree with is the concept of malnutrition, right? So maybe they're supposed to be 6'5", but they were severely malnourished from birth to 15, and they only end up being 5'11" or 5'10", right? Um, and this is stuff that science looks at when it comes to um, uh, inheritance and environmental influence. And so you have those two factors working together and or working against one another to produce the final product. This is just the people and complexity and interaction, and I liked this picture. Sorry, I know it's kind of random, like, oh, but it's all these people, right? And there you are, the little red one in the middle, and what everything you do affects everybody around you. Maybe less the further away you go, but nonetheless, what we do impacts people. People talk about, for example, from a Christian perspective, we talk about sin, and it's like, well, I'm just doing this sin over here. I'm not hurting anybody. Yes, we are greatly impacting others when we sin. Okay, so we've talked about this already to some degree, but we attach to one another in varying degrees of intensity. We talked about in your process papers. I'm really wanting you to look at this. I want you to be able to honestly acknowledge the different levels of intensity of attachment. You may say, well, I was really, really close to my dad, but I really wasn't nearly as close to my mom as I was to my dad, but my brother or sister, whatever, was the other way around for them. They were really close to their mom, to your mom, but not as close to your dad. That's what impacts that? Good grief, everything under the sun. I mean, there's a list here, and that's probably a small list, right, of the things that impact personality. We could put personality on there. I didn't put that on there. Illnesses that would fall under crisis potentially, depending on how severe it was. Okay, so next point. If conflict is unresolved, and it goes on for long periods of times, or there's lots of unresolved conflicts, obviously that's destructive to relationships and tends to cause people to distance from one another. And so at the same time that this is going on, we have this strong need for connectedness. And sometimes that's so people connect to people outside of the family, people connect to their work, people connect to a particular child within the family. In fact, the having children does seem to create a connectedness, but if there's a problem, you end up on the other end of it with a parent being connected to the child and still not connected to each other, and it creates this sense of I would almost call it false homeostasis, but it's a homeostasis, but it's not healthy, right? It quote works for the family, right? But it's not good. It's ultimately doesn't work. So when and you're wondering, you're like, okay, he's fixing to change the slide and he didn't talk about evolution versus creation. Yes, I am. So evolutionally thinking, as Bowen talks about, they would say that, and it's important for us to understand this and know this, they would say that the reason we have this strong need for connectedness is through the evolutionary adaptation process, because we've come to understand that we need to cooperate together as groups in order to survive, right? So if there is a saber-toothed tiger after me and I'm alone, I'm done. If there's a saber-toothed tiger around me and I'm with my community of 100 people, then I have a greater chance of surviving. From a Christian perspective, creationism perspective, I would say that God put it within us that God is a very relational God, and that God is literally, I think of God as just pulling out a little piece of himself and giving it to us. And part of that is, I believe he put in us a desire for relationship, a need for relationship, a need for connectedness. And this need is extremely strong. You think about families who are have had severe differences and conflict and problems, and maybe they are, there's an adult child that's, I haven't talked to dad in 15 years, or I haven't talked to mom in 20 years, or whatever, right? So but there's still this desire and oftentimes multiple attempts to restore the relationship. Again, I believe that comes from God. So I had to kind of roll my eyes about the ant thing, like, okay, let's just get some Amdro and take care of the ants. But I think there is this, well, what can we learn about ourselves from studying mice or studying ants? That's just a waste of time and ridiculous. Well, slow down. Maybe not, and you can certainly go to your grave with that opinion. It won't hurt my feelings. But when we're thinking about how systems function and how systems operate together and how systems work together, and when I say the word systems, guys, I'm talking about everything. There are mechanical systems, right? So you can have a $100,000 car. I don't have a $100,000 car, but you can have a $100,000 car and a $50 part doesn't work, and the whole thing is rendered useless until that part is replaced. Why? Because those parts are part of a large system that must function correctly together in order to operate. So there's value in understanding this when it comes to understanding families. So I thought this was interesting. I really kind of liked some of the stuff they said in here when you think about this with humans, right? So the ants, yes, the ant has an interaction with another ant. That changes the behavior of both ants. Those ants go off and have interactions with other ants, which in turn changes the interaction of the other ants, and the other ants that have interaction with the original ant, its behavior is also modified. Well, I love it. Yeah, that's just one of those. It's kind of like, whoa, what? Say it again. Yeah. Um, the value and the importance and the beauty of that is realizing and understanding how greatly we impact one another as brothers and sisters in Christ, as a part of a church. This is very fitting for church and church health and healthy churches. Is there freedom to think for yourself? Is there freedom to disagree with the pastor? Is there freedom to have healthy debate and discussion about what we believe? Depending on the answer to that is going to uh, give us insight into the level of health of that system. Church, I was thinking about as I spoke, but we can do that with family, right? So were you able to disagree with your parents? Were you allowed to disagree with your parents? Were you allowed to state your case, right? Well, if so, that's healthy. If not, that's not healthy. And this is true for any and every type of system in the universe. Um, so there is sensitivity levels to our environment, and you think about this with your siblings, yourself and your siblings, or yourself and your parents if you're a single child. Some people seem to be more sensitive to their environment than others. As a Christian counselor for years, I tend to think about how I would sit down with a husband and wife, and I'd say, okay, so how do you guys think you're doing? And she's like, oh man, we're doing horrible. We don't communicate, blah blah blah, whatever. And he is like, I'm so confused. I thought we communicated really well. I thought we were doing great. I thought we were fine. It's like, wow. They're not as sensitive, in other words, to their environment. And this is true for the children as well. So um, it's interesting to hear the textbook talk about, and Bowen and other scientists talk about this life force. And this is right out of the textbook, said it's unproven, right? It's like there's this thing out there that draws people together and draws systems together, even the ants, right? And by the way, God used the ant analogy, so he validates that to some degree, right? He used the ant analogy in the Bible um, to talk about how we all work together. Okay, anyway, and being hard workers and getting the job done and cooperation and all that good stuff. Um, so I look at this and say, well, this is probably something that they are observing and sensing, but they don't really understand where it comes from. And I think that's like, maybe it's God, right? Maybe God's got this thing going on that produces this connectedness, desire in every living creature, from the simplest amoeba or cell to the most complex um, system of creatures, which would be humans on Earth. Um, so there is this. Okay, so when we talk about a family, and we're talking about this balance of togetherness and distance, one example that I use is um, think about if you're married or if you've ever had a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Think about when you go to a party. So I feel like that this is a simplistic example, and yet I think it speaks to what we're talking about. I think it does a good job of helping us wrap our brain around this balance between togetherness and distance. So you have the couple. I'm going to do some continuums, right? On one end of the continuum, I have this couple who clings to each other the entire time they're at the party. I would I would I would posit that that is unhealthy. Uh, like they can't be okay if the other one is not around. Like what if one of them needs to go to the bathroom and the other one is sitting there with all these other people? Oh no, without him or her for 2 or 3 minutes. Like, oh, right, is that a problem? Right? Yeah. Well, if that's a problem, then that's a problem. There's a problem in the relationship and in the individuals in the relationship. The other extreme would be the couple who walks into the front door of the party, they part ways, they don't glance at each other, they don't smile at each other, they don't walk by and touch each other, they don't join a conversation in the same group ever at all. They don't even see each other the whole time, and then they get in the car and leave. I would pose that that's probably on the unhealthy side to the extreme. So you see the continuum, and again, I'm wanting you to really, many of you already do this well and naturally, but the thinking in terms of continuums is valuable. It helps keep us from making the all or nothing or black and white. That's the same thing, saying it two different ways. Thinking error. So all or nothing thinking error, right? It's all this way or it's all that way. No, there's varying degrees. So I'm gonna here's the crazy part, right? So as I try to explain, so what does a healthy balance look like? I'm going to have to say that it's going to look different for every couple, but it is at least somewhere in the middle of that continuum. Hopefully that makes sense. So I feel like this is one of those areas that my wife and I have down pretty good. So we have a party at our house, or we go to a party. Um, there is a mix of together and not together. She'll be off talking to a crowd of people. I'll be off talking to a crowd of people. We'll join the same crowd occasionally, intentionally. I will seek her out and uh, touch her gently on the back and smile at her and wink, how's it going, or whatever, right? Or so there's going to be little bits of this, it's this come together part. It's this connection that's there. And again, I'm not trying to say that. Please don't misunderstand. Oh, you're trying to say you're perfectly healthy. No, I'm not at all. I'm a disaster in a lot of ways, and a mess, and can be. And that I'm just saying in terms of that one example. Uh, it's going to look different for every couple, but there is a place of healthy balance there. Okay, we um, and along with that, on the next bullet there, it's that whole ability to function on your own, as well as ability to function as a unit, together as a family or one-on-one, with emotional and physical and spiritual intimacy between people. And that's an interesting thing. When a spouse leaves another spouse, there's oftentimes that feeling of like, I can't function without them. Well, sure you can. It's painful and it's difficult, and it will take some adjusting. But yes, you can function without them. And again, depending on a person's level of differentiation, depends on how well they're going to recover from that separation. Um, and the last point here, all living things, cellular all the way up to complex human, are very sensitive to changes in the system. So every little change in the system. I want you to think about when you are. I just want you to try to take note in real life, in your own family, how things change when someone appears or someone leaves in a group. Now, if you're the one that enters and joins the group, so there's 3 or 4 people standing there talking, and you walk up, it's going to be extended family, it could be whatever, it could be at work. you've changed the behavior and the thoughts of everyone in that circle. And so, but I want you to be aware of that. I want you to think about that. If you are in a group and someone leaves the group or someone enters the group, I want you to think about, notice and it could just be as simple as we greet them and, hey, how's it going? And, welcome to the group. We wouldn't necessarily say that, but, that extension, or maybe even the sense of rejection towards that person that joined the group. Sometimes the whole conversation will change. Sometimes the whole mood will change. You've heard a kid walks in and they look at mom and dad and turn around and walk out like, okay, mom and dad are arguing, and they didn't hear a thing. They just walked in and could feel it. They just knew. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So this balance of self-regulation between being an individual and being connected is at the core of the family unit, and is at the core of our thinking when it comes to differentiation. So this whole these universal processes really that we've been talking about this whole time, where does it come from? And I'm thinking, well, I know it's not necessarily acceptable to just shrug and say, God created it, so there you go. No, it's good for us to study and have deeper levels of understanding, and I think this material helps give us that deeper level of understanding. When you think about chemistry, I had a hang on, work with me. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that first bullet. Okay, I was looking for that. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I had this in there about this example. So our there used to be this quandary over chemical imbalance of the brain. Someone's depressed. Do they have a chemical imbalance? Well, yes. Well, how do you know that? Because we've studied it enough to know that if you're behaving in certain ways, that there is chemistry in your brain that are in line with that behavior, whether that be positive or negative, whether it be symptoms of psychosis or symptoms of depression or symptoms of anxiety. At the same time, please hear this, I'm not saying that it's all biochemical, that it's all just about neurons. I'm saying that our neurons change. What impacts that? Remember, I think I've said the term to y'all, spirit, soul, and body. So there's really there's a spiritual element, there is a soul, mind, will, and emotions element, and there is the body, the physical body element. So think about how our body chemistry changes. Think about what you feel when you become fearful, whether it's real or imagined fear. Someone, jumps out from behind a bush in the woods and scares you. Well, there's nothing really to be scared of, but what happened, right? Your heart started racing. You got this massive adrenaline rush. You're shaking. You're like, your extremities you may even get like a lactic acid buildup feeling in your legs. You feel weak. Whatever, right? So it changes. Think about when you get angry. Your body chemistry radically and drastically and quickly changes. Sexual arousal, extreme excitement and joy, right? So we know that the environment, circumstances, people, interactions change us chemically and sometimes dramatically. Think about a scenario where there's a lot of depression and a lot of negativity or a lot of anxiety in an environment, then it actually ends up almost, we wouldn't really use this word, but it's almost becomes brain damage, right? So the brain, the neurons and the neurological patterns get set up to recreate, to continue on this process of fill in the blank, depression or anxiety or whatever. Anyway, so hopefully y'all aren't just completely like, whew, okay, I'm just all confused. Read the chapter, listen to this a couple of times if you need to, it is complex, but I want you to grasp some of the complexity of it all and begin to appreciate the different levels of how we impact one another. All right, and that is it for this particular lecture. Goodbye, God bless, and thank you very much.